Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode number 4 of the Diamond Time Travel series. We began this about a month or so ago. And what our plan for these videos is we're going to do a trip through time and go through baseball history. And we're going to cover different baseball players, different teams, different eras, and we're going to show cards that pertain to the players, the teams, the eras that we're going to be discussing in each episode. Tonight's episode, we're going to cover 19th century, primarily baseball cards, but there are a couple of football cards going to be mixed in as well. And my co-host Caesar may come on a little bit later, but as of right now, has not been able to join us yet. But I do have a very special guest with me today, and I'm sure he's on screen already, so I'm sure you recognize him. This, of course, is Orlando from A Collector's Dream, fantastic YouTube channel, YouTube Hall of Famer, and nothing more I can say about Orlando that hasn't been said already. Just one of the best collectors around. Orlando, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Phil, for inviting me in this series that you've been doing. And I think it's a great start that you did with Caesar and his Ted Williams collection. And it's great that you're having me on here. And we're starting all the way back almost to the beginning of baseball history in the late 1800s.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure having you on with us. We appreciate you taking the time to come on here. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to run card by card. I'm going to picture the card on the screen, and Orlando's going to give a little conversation about the card, any pertinent details, how he picked it up, and so on. And then we'll move on to the next card. So the first card we're going to cover here, I have up on the screen the 1887 Old Judge King Kelly, the million, is it $10,000 Kelly? I almost called him $1 million Kelly. I guess that would be too much money for 19th century.
Well, I mean, really, when you think about it, the $10,000 Kelly, that was the bonus that he got way back then. And that probably is more like $1 million today if you think about it that way.
That's probably true.
Back in the early 1880s. And these Old Judge cards were produced, first ones in 1886, and it went through 1890. So it's very similar to the T206 issues that were issued, 4 years in this, and the T206 were 1909 to 1911. So the Old Judge, basically, they're just pictures, actual pictures of the players, and they were pasted on a cardboard backing. And this particular card, and we were having some issues, so I can't see the card right now, but I know what it looks like. It's my card, and this particular card is one of the rarest King Kelly cards because it's a portrait card. And, these cards were produced, like I said, for 4 years. And this was one of the first ones that was produced of King Kelly. And he has 2 portrait cards, one in the Boston uniform and one in the Chicago uniform. And the one you're looking at there is the rarest version of it. There's, as far as I've been able to see, there's about 5 of them known to exist. And the things with these cards is that they, since it is a photograph, they tend to fade a lot. This particular card is graded a 1, and it's because it was in a scrapbook. And that's one of the reasons why the picture is still so clear, about 135 years later. So it does have some scrapbook damage in the back. But King Kelly was really the first main, I guess, star of baseball back in the day. And if you ever heard of the story of Casey at the Bat, it's a very famous poem that they did at the end. Casey strikes out, mighty Casey. Well, that was made for King Kelly. King Kelly was Casey, the person who wrote that actual poem. he heard about King Kelly, and it's Mike Kelly was his real name, but he was the king of baseball back then. So the person who wrote the poem heard about him and went out to see a game, the first baseball game he had ever seen. And this is a literary guy, so he didn't know sports. And he went out to see Mike King Kelly play for the first time. And then unfortunately, right at the end of the game, Kelly went up there and he struck out. So that's where he wrote the poem, Mighty Casey Strikes Out. But King Kelly was one of these guys that was very similar to Babe Ruth, and he was well known to just be with the fans. He would go out after the game and have beers with the fans. He was kind of a drinker, but he did die young. He died in his late 30s, and he had literally died saving a person from the freezing snow. It was someone that he was outside and he saw this person literally freezing to death. And he offered the guy his big coat, and he put the coat on the guy, brought him in, and eventually took him to the hospital. But a few days later, Kelly got pneumonia.
Wow.
He was put in the hospital himself, and he was, I think, 36 years old or something like that. And he ended up passing away from pneumonia.
Wow.
But he was a true star of the day. He also did plays. So he was on Broadway because he was that famous, and he married a Broadway star. And he was one of these guys that had he was a drinker and stuff like many guys back in the day. So he just, one of these, really never was one of these guys that trained, but he was a big guy for his days. He was over 6 feet tall, over 200 pounds. And back in those days, that was a big size.
Oh, yeah.
And, he went from Boston to Chicago, and he played with Cap Anson. And, Cap Anson started spring training because of Mike King Kelly, because Kelly would come in and he was, kind of like the Babe Ruth style. He was out of shape. And so Cap Anson, who was a real big, fan, and he didn't drink or anything like that. And he was the kind of manager that wanted the guys to be in shape. When Kelly came on the team and he saw that he was just, out of shape, he, from then on, he started spring training. And the guys had to come on before the game started and get in shape and play some practice games. So you can attribute him to many things. Like spring training. Kelly also was not only was he a big power hitter guy at the time, but he also had speed. So the first they wrote a book about him, and they wrote a song about him. And the song that they wrote was called Slide Kelly Slide, because he was a fast runner around the bases. And this was the first true pop hit, number one pop hit of the era, because remember, this is the early 1880s, and that's kind of where the phonograph started coming in and music started coming in and stuff like that. So they wrote the song Slide Kelly Slide. And they did it because he invented what is today called the hook slide, where he would slide into the base and do the hook slide, because most of the guys that would slide right into the base. But to avoid the tag, he would do that hook slide. So he was also known for that. So he invented the hook slide. Spring training was invented for him. A lot of the rule changes in baseball were made because of him. Kelly was mostly an outfielder, but he was also a catcher, because he was just so knowledgeable about baseball that they wanted him to help the pitchers pitch, and he knew how to pitch to the guys. So he was a catcher. And another rule change they did because of him, and they did many rule changes because of him, but one of them was that back in the old days, you can, if you're going to switch players, do it in the middle of any time. All you had to do is just come out of the dugout and say, Kelly coming in as catcher, and then he'd just come right in. So one play, he was in the dugout, and there was another guy catcher, and he was in the dugout, because he wasn't playing that game. And then all of a sudden there was a pop-up, and the pop-up was right near the dugout. So Kelly saw that nobody was going to catch that ball. So he jumped out of the dugout and said, Kelly coming in as catcher. And he caught the ball, and it was an out. And the umpire had to call it out because he called it, kind of like in basketball, when you get the ball's going out of bounds and you get the ball and you're in the air and you call timeout in the air, So that was a rule that back in the day, you could do that anytime. So because of that particular play, they changed the rules, and they said that, no, you can't do that when the ball is in play. You have to wait until, So that's another story about King Kelly. And there's so many stories about King Kelly, like there were times that he would, back then they only had like one umpire, and the whole plate umpire and then another umpire. And sometimes that umpire would have to, run out to the outfield. And there were stories that Kelly sometimes ran straight from first to third without even going to second. And he would skip second base when the umpire wasn't looking, so he was one of these guys that kind of was a jokester, a trickster. And so many rules were made because of Kelly and because some of the things that he did back in the day. So he is really one of the biggest stars, along with Cap Anson. He's probably one of the more well-known stars. Now, in this particular set, the old Judge set, since it was produced for so many years, they only printed a certain amount of pictures for every player. And once those were inserted in the tobacco packs, then they were, had to take other pictures. So you'll find a lot of King Kelly cards out there from the old Judge. I think there's probably, since he was a big star, they produced, I think, somewhere around 10, I'm not sure if it's 10 or 12 different cards of King Kelly. There's only 2 portrait cards, and those were produced very early, like this one. And the rest of them are him standing, holding a bat, or pretending to be batting, or with the bat on the side. There were actual, entire body poses of King Kelly. But the rare versions are the ones that you see there that actually are the portrait ones.
Okay. Well, lots of good information. Thank you, Orlando. Very historically significant player.
Yes, he was.
And a very rare card, as Orlando said. All right, we're going to move on to our next card here.
Is that the other old Judge you're putting up there?
That one is going to be up momentarily. Here it is. Yeah, this is the other old Judge, Jack Clemens.
Jack Clemens.
Yep.
Jack Clemens. And the reason I wanted to share that one is because that is, as you can see, it's in an old SGC, the super old SGC. The first SGC cards that were actually done back in those days.
Labels.
Yeah. First labels, yeah.
Yeah.
But that particular card is graded an 8.5, a 92, I think it is, an 8.5.
Right.
And I wanted you to see what a card that would be pulled right out of the tobacco pack would look like. They're very rare to find an old Judge with that kind of picture, that bright a picture, and that color. I mean, not color, but that a picture that is so clear that it literally looked like it was pulled out of the pack yesterday. So I wanted to give you a good look at what they look like. If you can imagine somebody pulling one out of that cigarette pack back in the day and looking at that card and how clear that picture is. And, and that's literally a card right out of the pack from 1887 or 1888. And Jack Clements was a catcher back in the day. And even though he's not in the Hall of Fame, he was one of the best catchers back in that era. And then I did a little video about him. And he was one of the first catchers to ever use a chest protector. And, initially they started, early baseball was pitching underhand, and then they came overhand. And when they came overhand and they started throwing fastballs, those catchers had no protection. So he was the first guy to have a lamb skin. It was just the skin of a lamb that he would just tie up on his chest. And that thing would, if he missed the ball, because they were all barehanded catchers, and you could see there how he was a barehanded catcher. And if he missed the ball, it wouldn't hit his chest. It would hit that leather lambskin that was kind of, laying. They would lean forward, and that thing would be, a few inches, before his chest. So it would take the brunt of the hit if they ever missed it. So that's Jack Clements, and he had a pretty high WAR. I think his WAR was close to 40, and he was a good hitter and from back in the day. But unfortunately, there's a lot of players back then that were forgotten, and Jack Clements is one of them. But he was one of the top catchers from back in the day, and that is his old Judge card, which is really, just like it came right out of the pack yesterday. You can see how clear those pictures were. And now all those pictures were taken in a studio, so a lot of those backgrounds were kind of just drawn in. And usually the ball was hanging with a little string. So it looked like it was being thrown or caught, but really it was just hanging with a string. But you could see how clear, and you can imagine somebody pulling that card out of a pack and seeing such a beautiful photograph, back in the late 1880s, where most people had never even seen photographs from back in those days. The photographs were made actually from tin, or tin types. Tin backing. So that's why I wanted to share that one, because it's just one of the more pristine old Judge cards that you'll probably ever see.
Yeah, and like Orlando said, with old Judge collectors are more concerned about the image and how bold and how the contrast is, as opposed to the corners or the edges, or any kind of back damage. Old Judge collectors, if you've got a card with the clarity like Orlando's Clements here, that's really as good as it gets. And then the condition being a 8.5 is just really insane. You never find an old Judge anywhere above maybe a 5 or a 6, and that's very high. So really great card.
Thanks. Yeah, and even if you find him in a 5 or a 6, many times the pictures are faded.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just a handful of cards graded over an 8 in old Judge nowadays, with that clarity of a picture.
Yep. Okay. And next one we're going to pull up is the 1895 Mayo cut plug Cap Anson.
Yeah. The 1895 Mayo. Now, again, the first baseball card set was the old Judges. And, like I said, it was over a few years, and there's over 5,000 different pictures or different cards, if you really want to think about that. Imagine over 5,000 different cards with different pictures. But this 1895 Mayo was the first real baseball card set that was produced, that just had a certain amount, produced just 1 year alone, and had a certain amount of cards strictly for baseball. Had all the big name stars in there from the 1890s, and they were real difficult to get in any condition, because these were not in cigarette packs. These were in literally a cut plug tobacco, which is loose tobacco, in a tin or in a bag of tobacco. And as you can see, these cards had a black border, and even the back of the card was black. So it was like a black, it was a black backing on those. And they're actual photographs of the player, and inserted in these loose tobacco. And with those black borders, like the 71 Topps, it's almost impossible to get those cards in those that black chips off very easily. And this particular one is Cap Anson, and Cap Anson again was the really the best player in the era, because he did play for many years, and he was the first player to have 3,000 hits, and he was the first big manager player, and again he invented spring training. He wrote many of the rules back then. Again, as a person, a lot of people don't like him because he was considered a racist back in the day. But you have to remember, these cards were produced, just 30 years or so after the Civil War, and there were, half the country was literally racist. So, it was just, he was born in that era, and he was from that era. And that's why a lot of people don't like him. But, the reason I collect him is because he's the history of the game. He's one of these guys that was the best player at the time. He batted over 400 a few times, and his average was way in the high 300s. And he really established a lot of things and a lot of rules in baseball. And you can't talk about the history of baseball without talking about the great Cap Anson.
Yep.
So this is a portrait card of him, and you could see exactly what he looked like. He had kind of blonde hair, and that's one of the cards from that set. And there's a lot of other stars in that set, like Dan Brothers and some of the other guys. And there's another one you're going to show there, who was another the Buck Ewing.
Oh yeah.
Pull that up.
Okay. So let's get out of there. Oops.
Yeah, you kicked me off there. Okay.
Sorry, Orlando.
That's okay. As long as let me know if you got the card up there.
Yep. Yeah, give me a minute.
Okay.
Let's see. All right, let's see. You want the Buck Ewing? Let me pull the Buck Ewing up.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so 1895 Mayo cut plug Buck Ewing. This one looks like much nicer condition than the Cap Anson.
Right. I wanted to show one that looked like it was, again, one kind of almost like right out of the pack there. Now, the only reason this one is on authentic is because on the right hand, it was touched up with some color at some time. I don't know when. It may have been done now in the modern era, but it has literally had color added to it.
Okay, kind of like the 71,
Just
the 71 Topps baseball.
Just like they do in the 71. But other than that, you can see, all the other sides and all that were chip free. And again, it looks like it was almost like pulled right out of the pack. That's what it would have looked like once somebody would have taken it out of that tin of tobacco, loose tobacco that it came in. It just stuffs right into that tobacco, either a tin or a bag of loose cut plug tobacco that somebody would roll the cigarettes with. So Buck Ewing, again, was one of the big time players. Again, another catcher. And, Buck Ewing was one of the first catchers that really wore the entire catcher's uniform with the catcher's mask. And he actually invented a chest protector that he wore was like an inflatable. You could literally just, blow it up, almost like like one of those lifesaver things. So he upgraded some of the equipment, and
Okay.
I'm pretty sure he was the first one that also wore shin guards.
Okay.
So he kind of was one of the guys that did the entire catcher's, I guess catcher's uniform type
Okay.
thing with the mask and the shin guards and the inflatable chest protector.
Okay.
But Buck Ewing is, I know was an incredible player, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I think he's in the Hall of Fame, but he's
Yeah.
well known for all the things he did, not just as a catcher, but another great hitter.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to share that one because that's an example of, you could see how clear the picture of Buck Ewing is, and how that card would have looked if you would have taken
Yeah.
that card right out of a pack of cards. It was just a photograph, a clear photograph, not
Mhm.
faded, and you could see exactly what he looked like back in the day. Remember, there was no way for fans to see what players looked like unless you went out to see the games. There was,
Right.
of course, no TV or anything like that, and really no radio even back in those days.
Right.
So you'd have to, see a photograph or see his picture in a newspaper, and the newspapers were real crude pictures. Some of the lithographs they made in newspapers were actually, like woodcuts.
Yeah.
I know you know a little bit about the woodcuts, and they were carved in the wood. So
Yeah.
it was more pictures type things. They weren't actually photographs. So to
Right.
get an actual photograph of the player and see what he actually looked like must have
Mhm.
been a huge thrill for the collector back in the day.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's what a Mayo Cut Plug card would look like out of a pack. And you can see on the bottom there it has his name, and then it
Yeah.
has the logo of a Mayo Cut
Yeah.
Plug tobacco down there for chewing
Mhm.
and smoking. It
Yeah.
says there.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, I believe Ewing has actually two different variations in the
Yes,
set,
he does.
right? He has the Cleveland and then maybe Cincinnati, I think was the other.
Yeah, he played for two different teams.
Right.
So
Right.
there's two different versions. And
Okay.
I think that the Cleveland one is a little rarer than the other one, but
Okay.
not by much,
Okay.
because they probably printed them. And then when he changed team, they printed it, another printing of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, he's one of the few guys that there's two versions of it.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to our next card here. And let's see what we've got. Okay, we've got our good friend Mike King Kelly again. This is the Goodwin Champions.
Yeah. And that card to me is the prettiest card ever made. I mean, in my opinion, that's the 1888 N162 Goodwin Champions, and the Goodwin Champions set is really the first set that was produced with all full color. You have the Allen and Ginters, which is all white, and then you have some color in the middle with the picture of the guy, the drawing of the guys. But this Goodwin Champion set was really when Allen and Ginter printed theirs in 1887. That was really literally the first like color cards, and then Mr. Goodwin, who also was the guy that owned the old Judge cards. He printed the old Judge cards. Goodwin decided, he was going to outdo Allen and Ginter by making his cards even better. And he used a new process that was called lithography. And that was something that wasn't done back in the day. And then literally what it is that they would use limestone blocks, and they would carve the images in the limestone block. And they had to do different colors. So they'd have to have like different, the blue and the red, there were really four colors: the black, blue, or the red was magenta, and the yellow. And that's still a process that's used today. And it was chromolithography. And it's the process today that we see as chrome cards. That comes from the chromolithography that Mr. Goodwin invented back in the day. And that is that process of producing those four colors and putting them together, one on top of each other, to come up with that beautiful chromolitho, which we call chromolithography or chromolitho cards, or was shortened today to chrome cards. So those cards, as you can see, how beautiful they were made, they were extremely expensive to produce. So they were produced in much less quantities based on, if you would compare those, the Goodwin Champions to the Allen and Ginter, which also were champion cards and also was a set of 50 cards, they produced about 25% of the quantity. So, for every 100 Ginter cards, there's 25 produced of the Goodwin Champions, because the process was a handmade process. They had to literally do them by hand, and then they would, cut them from the sheet, and you could only put a certain amount on that sheet. I think it was 8 cards per sheet. So you could see how they would, the beauty of those cards, and the background, you could see the sky was kind of like a stormy sky, and the image of the player, how they would do it, and it's just a full color artwork in the entire card, which was something that was never seen back in the day, and Mr. Goodwin was the first one to do that, and doing that with that Goodwin Champion set. And apart from the Allen and Ginter, which was produced for a couple of years, those cards were so expensive that Goodwin could not produce them anymore. He only made them that first year, and it was very, very limited. And they were also inserted into packs of tobacco cards. And they were produced, and they were there was an insert in those cards, and I think I sent you a little card of the actual coupon that came with those cards. And inside the pack of cigarettes, they also would put a little coupon, and that coupon you could redeem to get the old Judge cabinet cards. So you've all seen the big size cabinet cards that were produced. Well, you would need those coupons in order to get those cabinet cards. And the other thing that you can get with the coupons were the albums that were produced back in the day, just like Allen and Ginter produced albums. Well, they also produced albums, the Goodwin Champions album, which I have one. I have it with me, but I'm not going to go downstairs and get it. But you would have to get, I think, 50 coupons plus send some money in to get those actual albums. And
okay,
so yeah, so inside the pack, you would have the cigarettes, that little slip of paper, and the card, and the paper would protect the card from the cigarettes. So you see the coupon there now?
Yeah, the coupon's up there now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And those again are very, very rare, because many were redeemed or they were thrown away, because it's literally just a slip of paper.
Right.
And it's two-sided, and one side it says to get the old Judge cabinets, and on the other side it said how to get the albums.
Okay. All right, let's move on to, let's see what we've got here. This will probably be our last card for this episode. Let me see what we've got.
Well, we only have a few more. I mean, so we're on 35 minutes. I don't know if we want to go another 10 minutes. We can probably go through it.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let's try to do that then. All right. We
So
got
you
another
can pull
good
up
one. Another
which
good
one are
one,
you-
champion Cap Anson.
Yeah, that's the Cap Anson. Now that Cap Anson is really known to be the main card from the 1800s. That's probably the one that most people know the most, and the most popular one of the most popular or of the best player back of the 19th century. So that's kind of what I call, in my opinion, that's the most iconic card of the 19th century. And you see, again, that yellow sky background, and it shows a great portrait picture of Cap Anson, and a drawing of what he looked like versus the Mayo, which is a picture of the Cap Anson.
Okay.
So that's to me the most iconic card of the 19th century. If there was one card that I'd say to get from that era, that's probably the one. It's probably the most popular one.
I took your advice, and that's the only Goodwin Champions card I own is a Cap Anson. So
Yeah, and probably
okay,
the
I'm going to
most
show.
expensive one.
Yeah, I've got one more Goodwin Champions to show here.
Okay.
This is the Dan Browsers.
Dan Brothers. Dan Brothers was a big power hitter back in the day, and again, he's a Hall of Famer. And you could see again another portrait of him kind of looking sideways a little bit there. But he was a huge guy. I mean, he was like 6'3", 240 pounds. He was probably one of the biggest guys, and he was really the first big power hitter back in the day. And Browders is well known for being, one of the strongest guys back in the day, and a big power hitter, and definitely one of the major players from back in the 19th century. And the Goodwin Champion cards there's 8 baseball cards in the set, along with a lot of other players, a lot of other athletes of different sports. But there's 8 baseball players, and 4 of them are Hall of Famers. And I think I also send you the Tim Keefe. You can find that and pull that up.
Yeah, let me try to pull that one up.
And the reason I sent you the Tim Keefe is because the Tim Keefe is the highest graded and one of the highest graded cards in the entire set. The Goodwin Champions, they're rare, they're tough. There's less than 100 known for any player. Most of them, there's less than 50 cards known to exist. And in some of them, there's less than 20 cards known to exist. And there's no Goodwin Champion card of all of the cards, and the total of all of the ones printed, there's none graded a 9. And there's just a handful of 8s. And one that I have in an 8 there is the Tim Keefe. So I wanted to show that one so you could see exactly what the card would look like, literally right out of the pack. And you can see how beautifully centered that is. And that is the best Tim Keefe card that exists. And again, Tim Keefe he won over 320 games. He had over 2,500 strikeouts. He was one of the best pitchers, if not the best pitcher of the era. Tim Keefe is known for the inventor of the changeup, because he not only was he one of the fastest throwers back in the day, but in order to fool players, he would do what he called the change of pace pitch. So he called it a change of pace, and he showed other players how to throw it, but it's called today the changeup. And players like Greg Maddux, who became true legends because of that changeup.
Oh, yeah.
That's who Tim Keefe was. Tim Keefe was a very hard thrower, accurate thrower. I mean, back in the day, having that many strikeouts, Tim Keefe won over 30 games for 6 years in a row. If you can imagine somebody accomplishing that. And he won over 20 games almost every year that he played. And he ended up with, I think it's 324 wins in
Wow.
total. Again, with
Nice.
over 2,500 strikeouts. And most of those strikeouts came not because of his fastball, which was fast, but because of the changeup that players, did not even know how to handle back in the days, because he invented that change of pace pitch. So that's what he's known for. And again,
Okay.
one of the legends of one of the pioneers of baseball, especially of pitching, was
Nice.
Tim Keith.
Beautiful card.
Yeah, they're all beautiful. All of the Goodwin Champion cards.
Definitely. Okay, let's see who we have up next here. Okay, we're down to our 2 football cards.
Yeah, I wanted to show some football cards also from that era.
So this is the Mayo Cut Plug.
The Mayo Cut Plug, and that's the anonymous card. That card is considered the holy grail of football cards. It's kind of like the Honus Wagner, because that card, there's only a handful of those cards known to exist. Maybe 10, probably less than 10. And even my card, that card that you see there, was originally in a PSA holder and was cracked out and put in an SGC holder many, many years ago. As you can see, it's in an old slab. Yeah. And the only reason it's graded authentic is because, again, because of the black borders, as we talked about, somebody tried to color in the top of that card with some, you could see it there. Somebody did a terrible job of getting some type of marker and coloring it in, coloring the top border there. Wow. with a black Sharpie or something. But that anonymous card is John Dunlop. And the reason why it was called anonymous is because you could see there is no name on the card at all. All it has is the Mayo Club logo and, for smoking and chewing. And I'll share with you another one with the name, and you can see how the name is printed there. This is Mackey. So it should have the name and the team. This says Mackey, Harvard. That's how it should have been printed. But what ended up happening was when they printed it, the printer noticed that they forgot the name of the player and the team name. So they took it off the press and they never printed any more of those. It was only an initial first run, and they saw that they had made a mistake and they never corrected it. So then they didn't print any more of those cards other than just the initial run, where what they would do is they would print and then they would look at the sheet and take a look at the sheet and do like a proof, like a proof sheet from the first printing, first couple of sheets. And when they noticed that they had forgotten the name of the player and the name of the team, they took that card right off the press and continued to print the other players, except for that particular card. And John Dunlop, again, that's when it was college football, and he was, if not one of the top players of the day. He was a 3-time All-American. And he went on to coach a team, an undefeated team back in the day from Harvard. And he was one of the best players back then. But because they forgot his name and the team, they only printed a very few of them. And my research shows there's probably 9 of those cards that exist in any grade. And the highest graded is a 3. And they didn't really know who that player was because they didn't know. There was no name or no team. They just had the picture. But back in the mid 80s, talking 1985, almost 100 years after that card was made, a college football researcher finally went back and researched to try to determine who is on this card, because it was always called the anonymous card. And he finally matched it up with some pictures and team pictures and determined that that player was actually John Dunlop. And that was only discovered about 100 years after the card was printed. And that's why it's called the anonymous card. And that's why it's so rare. And even many collectors back in the day, whoever had that card didn't know who it was. And again, the small amount that were printed were probably lost or thrown away. I mean, it's over 120 years old now, 130 years old now. So that's why that card is so rare, and so few of those still exist today. And that particular card, and you can see how clear that picture is. Even if you look at the one that was graded, the highest graded example in the 3, which I've seen all the ones that exist. This is probably the best picture of any of the cards of John Dunlop that exist. And the ones that were graded, you can remember the Cap Anson, you saw the condition of that. Well, you can imagine, and that's a 2. You can imagine how the Dunlop was. So the Dunlop ones that are still out there, the pictures, a lot of them are faded. A lot of them are, scratched or scraped, or the picture's not as clear. And this one shows, from what I've seen, I consider it the best picture of John Dunlop. And if it wasn't for someone trying to color that top border, that card would have been probably the highest graded card of the anonymous card known to exist.
Yeah, very nice card. That seems to be a common theme in your collection, with super nice images, super nice pictures of the player. Seems to be a priority with your collecting style.
Well, eye appeal wasn't just established a couple of years ago like people talk about it now. Us collectors that have been collecting a long time, always went for the nicest looking card. And centering was always tough, and you always wanted to get centered cards. And but again, it's become almost the in thing now, the eye appeal and the centering. But to collectors that have been collecting for a long time, it's always been about the eye appeal and the centering of the cards.
Yeah.
So we got one more card to share.
Yeah, now we've got the last football card, right?
The last football card, which is really the first football card. So it's really the first football card ever made, and that's the Beecher. And Beecher is the back in those days, the only teams that existed were college teams, and it was Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. And you could see Beecher there. And Beecher was really the first superstar of football. And this is the first football card ever made, and it is part of the Goodwin Champions set. And it was just put into the Football Card Hall of Fame. There is a Football Card Hall of Fame. So Beecher Beecher really was the biggest star of the day. He played for the undefeated Yale team. He was the captain of the team. And you can imagine they only played 10 or 11 games back then. And he was the leading scorer. He was the quarterback, and he was the captain of the team. And that year before, in 1887, he scored 30 touchdowns. In an era where they really weren't throwing the ball, it was just strictly running the ball, and it was mostly defense. And this guy scored 30 touchdowns in 1887 to lead Yale to an undefeated season. And they went on in 1888 to another undefeated season, with Beecher being the captain and the quarterback of the team. And so when Mr. Goodwin decided to pick the 50 champions or the greatest athletes of the era back in 1888, he had to include Beecher because he was the best football player and the first football player to ever appear on a card, on an actual card. So that's the first football card ever made, which is Beecher. Yeah, so that's the story of Beecher.
Another beautiful card.
Thanks. So I guess that covers some of some of the main cards from my 19th century collection there, Phil.
Yeah, those are. I'm flabbergasted, really. The condition of the cards, the players on the cards, and just the eye appeal. Just a fantastic collection and a tribute to you being the one who assembled that. It's really been very much of a joy to sit with you tonight and go through these 19th century cards. I know you've got lots of 20th century beauties as well. So really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your collection. I think our viewers are really going to respond in kind with tonight's video. And this will wrap up our episode number 4 then for Diamond Time Travel. Again, thank you so much to Orlando. Orlando, you want to say a few words?
Just thanks for having me. And, it's not just about the cards, it's about sharing the history of those players so that they're never forgotten. Because remember, these guys were all stars of the day, and that's the only reason that they appeared on baseball and football cards. So the history is, to me, one of the most interesting thing about these cards.
Okay. Once again, thank you so much, Orlando. Everybody have a great evening, and we'll catch you again on the next one.